To the contrary, no, the ayes have it. This bill is set down for third reading forthwith.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Minister Maurice Williamson.
Mr Speaker, we have just been through the Committee of the Whole of the Building Act Amendment No. 4 bill, and I was asked by one of the speakers to have put a bit more time into what's in the bill. I don't intend to take a long time through the bill, but I do want to say that the most important ingredient in this bill makes it mandatory for a builder to provide a written contract for any work if it's over $20,000. So not if you're getting your kitchen cupboards redone or you're getting a door to the laundry changed or so on, but for any work that's more than slightly sort of trivial. And there are some really important ingredients. First of all, the builder must provide to the consumer a checklist of what the client, that information is available to them, their rights, their obligations under the building work process, so the consumer becomes well informed. They need to disclose to the client information about their skills, their work history and their business, so they need to show to the consumer, this is what I am in terms of a skilled, qualified practitioner, this is the history of my work program they can go and look at, and this is what my business is structured like as to whether it might fold because it is so delicate, and that is, I think, vitally important to the consumer. And finally, they have to enter into a absolutely written contract so that it's actually watertight. So, I thank the House for processing this through, but I think it's worthwhile just covering a couple of points off, especially points raised by Materia Ture from the Green Party about National's deregulation of the building sector. And these points I want to make now are not to try and play silly games or anything, they're just straight factual. The Building Amendment Bill of 1991, or Building Amendment Act of 1991, was introduced into this Parliament by Labor, by the Honourable Margaret Austin. She introduced it in 1990 because Labor thought that the whole building sector needed dramatic reform, and to be absolutely honest, National agreed with it. And so when we became government in 1990, we finished off the bill by passing it through its third reading and making it become an act. But it wasn't ours to start with. In fact, I've got some wonderful quotes from George Hawkins when he became the minister later on, saying, "Don't dare National claim credit for that act. That was ours. Yes, it might have been passed when you were government, National, but it was our bill that Margaret Austin introduced, and Labor deserves the credit for it." So be very careful about accusing National of being the deregulating government that changed the Act in 1991. We didn't introduce it. We didn't put it through its first few stages, including the Select Committee. We only gave it its third reading because we agreed with it. So it wasn't a Labor Party Act. The second thing I think that's worthwhile covering is that it wasn't anything to do with this Parliament. It wasn't anything to do with a minister, and it wasn't anything to do with a member of Parliament or anything else that was the key cause for our leaky home syndrome. There's an independent agency, completely independent of ministers and this Parliament, called Standards New Zealand. And it was Standards New Zealand who, after a lot of advocacy from the big timber companies, Fletchers and Carters, saying that treated timber had all sorts of arsenics and carcinogens and all sorts of ghastly stuff that could leach into the builder's skin and so on, and we didn't need it anymore. And interestingly, if you read the report, because I've read it with great interest, it said that borer was no longer an issue. That's why we had mainly treated timber up until 95, for borer. And so Standards New Zealand, Mr Chairman, not any minister in any government or any select committee or any member of Parliament were involved in it, decided to allow kiln-dried timber as an acceptable solution under the Building Act. Now, in hindsight, that proved to be a huge mistake. And the country's paying billions. Pricewaterhouse have estimated 11.2 already and could be double that. So be very careful of laying the blame to any political party and be very careful to be laying the blame to any minister for the decision to go to untreated timber. No minister, even if at the time they had known it, and I don't know who the minister was in '95, but I don't think they would have even known it was an issue because Standards New Zealand just did it independently and announced that decision. And then finally, Andrew Williams says he doesn't like the idea of risk-based consenting. That is, things that are at the very low end of the risk curve. Things that are using stock standard products, using stock standard design, treated timber, 3-bedroom. He doesn't like the idea of that having a lot less scrutiny than something that's at the high end of the risk curve. Well, I say to Mr Williams, we used to have the full scrutiny, the 18 inspections, the building consent process, and the actual code of compliance on all those buildings. And did that give the consumer protection? Did that save them from the disasters that they've had? So why he would be advocating we need to stay with the full set of consents and inspections and code of compliance when it didn't give thousands of consumers the protection, why would you then say, well, that's what we should stay with? That's what we should stay with, because it didn't give them protection. And if he thinks it did, there are tens of thousands of people out there now who are dramatically out of pocket and hurt by it. So the whole purpose of it, and this was the whole direction of the review, was to say, why don't we look at things that are at the low end of the risk curve? Why don't we look at things that are almost a guaranteed not to be an issue? And we've already done it with a thing called multi-proof, where we've said to people, come and get your consent for the building once and only once, and then when you go out and build multiple copies of it around the country, you don't need to keep going to the local authority for each individual version of that building, which is a good move. But I also say to them, while we've got now another thing that I don't think Andrew Williams is giving any credit for is, as of March last year, the Licensed Building Practitioner Scheme. And sir, what that says now is that if you're going to build a house and be involved in either the structural integrity or the weathertight envelope of that building, you actually have to be a qualified practitioner. You have to have been through a whole series of processes to evaluate your skills and your talents and your qualifications, and you then become a licensed practitioner. Up until March of last year, sir, all you needed to do to build a house was have a cell phone, a dog and a ute. Anyone could have gone and built a house up until March of last year. No longer can you do that. You now have to be a qualified person or be supervised by a qualified person. So, sir, why would we then say to a qualified practitioner, why would we say to them, sir, that the regime is like it is, you're qualified, we don't need all the scrutiny, but in fact, we still think we should have bureaucrats pour over you for something quite so simple. So in the end, Mr Speaker, I thank some of the Labor members for their words. I know they haven't thought the bill goes far enough, but sir, in fact, let me say, I think I agree with it. But sir, it's better that we make some incremental improvements as time rolls by than try to find a way of solving all of the problems in one hit. And I would really hope that we get the Law Commission to give a report about moving away from joint and several and moving to a proportionate level. So, Mr Speaker, I'm really happy to move that the Building Amendment Bill number 4 be now read a third time.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, as